Good morning, everyone. I'm Pam Helton with the Georgia Municipal Association, and I'd like to welcome you to our third webinar in a series of tutorials on using QuickBooks for governmental accounting. Since payroll can be such a complex part of accounting, we have chosen to split the Payroll Administration into two segments. Today we will have an overview of the payroll setup process, and we will offer part two of the Payroll Administration at a later date. We will be sending out some information announcing the date next week. As you know, this tutorial was developed to be an overview of the payroll process and to provide some resources for you. We ask that you consult with your accountant or your city attorney on any specific questions related to federal and state laws that govern payroll administration. Our presenter for today is Sabrina Kate of Capable Financial Solutions. Sabrina taught financial management classes for the Carl Vinson Institute of Government and for GMA for our elected officials, and she has been a great resource for local governments with their financial administration needs. We ask that you use the question and answer box that's located to the right of your screen to type your questions in, and at the end of the session, we will review these questions for everyone. We also want you to know that this presentation will be available, the PowerPoint presentation will be available at the end of the session at a PDF file that you can download and have available for your review. And we will also be recording the webinar so that you can view it from our website. And we look forward to having your comments, your suggestions, any feedback that you may have about the webinar and any future webinars that you would like to see the GMA take on for cities for information or for otherwise. So with that, we'll get started with our session for today, and I'll turn it over to Sabrina.
Thank you, Pam. As Pam mentioned, I am Sabrina Cave with Capable Financial Solutions. I'm going to be leading our session today. We do welcome those questions. If we do find that your questions are unique to your specific government, we will try to answer these after the session, but we will try to answer all the general questions as we get to the end of the session. Pam and other members of GMA staff have visited cities throughout the year, and they're in constant contact with their membership. Based upon these visits, what they've heard from the cities around the state of Georgia, we've developed this tool today, and as Pam mentioned, this is our third in the series of QuickBooks tutorials to help cities so that they can optimize the use and the functionality of QuickBooks to the best of their ability. QuickBooks 2013 Pro is not technically designed for fund accounting, which is what is required by local governments, but QuickBooks is a less expensive alternative that many cities use in conjunction with other software applications like their utility billing, occupational tax, property tax, and other applications to report on the city's financials. We've attempted to combine the specifics within QuickBooks Pro 2013 with material that's specific to Georgia cities, such as the Uniform Chart of Accounts and other financial-related laws, to help cities understand how to use QuickBooks products more efficiently in day-to-day operations of running City Hall. Keep in mind, QuickBooks is not designed to perform fund accounting as it truly exists that is unique to government. We have created some workarounds to help us make QuickBooks Pro 2013 adapt to our needs. We are not representing QuickBooks in these tutorial sessions. All rights related to QuickBooks remain with Intuit, and you'll see a notation at the bottom of each screen to that effect. As Pam mentioned, payroll involves very complex laws, therefore we always recommend you consult with your accountant and city attorney for specific questions. We are providing basic resource information, and this tutorial in no way expresses legal or accounting advice to you and your city. Payroll setup is such a tedious task. That's why we've broken it into two sessions. And what you'll see is the first two objectives we are going to meet with the session today, where we actually work through the setup process using the resources at the various federal and state agencies to help us do that. But our first discussion actually needs to center around who are your employees. When we hear payroll, we sometimes intertwine human resource-related functions to payroll-related functions. For purposes of this session, payroll means the actual processing of payment to your employees. But the first step should be to determine who are the city employees and who are the city independent contractors. Well, that sounds easy enough, but we need to examine our accounts payable vendor relationships to make sure we aren't treating some vendors as vendors when in fact we should be treating them as employees. The IRS uses 3 key areas to determine if a relationship the city has is considered a contracting relationship, which means you'll issue a 1099 at the end of the calendar year, or whether your relationship is an employment relationship in which you will issue a W-2 at the end of the calendar year. Behavioral relates to how much instruction and training is given to the entity you're using. Financial deals with whether you have the right to direct or control the business part of their business. And the relationship piece involves how does really the worker and the city perceive this relationship to be? Do they perceive it to be contractual or do they perceive it to be employment? More information on this can be found at the IRS website, which is www.irs.gov, so that you can properly know if you are treating your relationships correctly. We all realize that payroll constitutes a large portion of local government expenditures. It can comprise anywhere from 50 to 90% of the expenditures of a general fund. There are several pieces of data that will be necessary in order to fully set up and utilize the payroll function within QuickBooks. In order to complete the employee setup of all employees, it is best to gather the information directly from their completed signed forms if possible. By doing it this way, it provides you the opportunity to verify all forms have been signed and completed properly, and that they are easily located in the event of an audit by a federal or state agency. However, if for time purposes you wish to use data in your existing software, you can do it that way. But the downside of doing it this way is that if something is incorrect in your old system, it is going to be incorrect in your new system. Deduction forms and direct deposit forms are also good forms to have on hand during employee setup, in addition to the forms required by the federal and state agencies that you see here. QuickBooks has easy access to the federal forms actually inside the application from the web, and the I-9 and the W-4, and they also have a direct deposit authorization form that your employees can complete. Of course, all of these can be found at the federal agency websites, but this is just an easy way to get it inside QuickBooks. You access it by clicking Employees under the menu bar, and then you will see Employee Forms, and then the forms will pop up that are available. 2 phrases we often hear in local government is exempt and non-exempt when it comes to classification of employees. It is important to understand that FLSA, the Fair Labor Standards Act, governs many employment-related issues, and in this session there is a need to bring this to your attention because in setup of employees you will need to determine whether an employee is exempt or non-exempt. Exempt employees are entitled to overtime compensation, and non-exempt employees are not entitled to overtime pay. For the most part, although not completely, this status depends on how they are paid and what kind of work they do. With few exceptions, to be an exempt employee, they must be paid at least $23,660 at the current time per year and be paid on a salary basis and also perform exempt duties. You can find much information on the Department of Labor's website at www.dol.gov to help you answer your questions about whether your employees are exempt or non-exempt. We have to find all of the city ID numbers. We've identified our employees. Now we have to gather the information on how the city was set up with the IRS, the Department of Labor, and the Department of Revenue. The best ways to find these are to locate your most recently filed quarterly payroll tax returns. 941 is the form number that's used to remit funds to the IRS and report to the IRS. A DOL-4 is the current form that is used for the Department of Labor at the state of Georgia. And the G7, and at the end of the year, the 1003 is the form that is actually used for the Department of Revenue, or DOR. If you can locate all of your W-2s from last year, that would also be helpful in your setup process. During setup, it is important to understand what benefits the city offers with respect to all types of leave, whether that is vacation pay, sick pay, comp time, as well as what the city pays and deducts on all type of insurances that it offers to its employees, and that last but not least, any retirement, whether these are 457 plans or fully paid city plans. You'll want to gather this information so that when you get to this during this payroll setup process, you know how to properly handle it. In our previous sessions, we talked about navigation, and now that we have gathered our employee information and our setup information, we can proceed into Quickbooks to get going. Remember, to get into the City of Exampleville that we had previously created, we would go to File and Open and Previous Company, and then we would select City of Exampleville. A couple of navigational reminders. Home is always what takes you to your main page. The area in yellow are how we get to our functional areas in Quickbooks. And I use this area when I'm looking for a specific thing. QuickBooks sometimes calls this icon bars. The area which is circled in orange is where process flow happens on day-to-day, and you should not skip steps in process flow that you will, because this could cause you issues inside QuickBooks. The red arrow indicates you can click on these and it will take you directly to that full section. During initial setup, we did not turn on payroll, so that is the first thing we need to do in order for us to begin seeing menus and using the payroll function. The red arrow here indicates where we will click to get started. You can also get there by clicking Employees, Payroll, Turn Payroll On, and QuickBooks. Automatically, a payroll subscription box will pop up. When you purchased QuickBooks, it was just for the software. It may or may not have been for the payroll subscription. Therefore, if you haven't purchased a payroll subscription, it will actually pop up. And it will be different pricing depending on whether you are upgrading, depending on whether you have done this at the time. And it will ask you how you would like to pay, if you would like to do this monthly or annually. And included with the unlimited is the free direct deposit inside QuickBooks. Now that the payroll is activated, you'll notice that the section in payroll looks different. It now is more of a process order where we enter time, we pay liabilities, we process forms, and again, you can always get to the payroll area by clicking on the Payroll Center. Cities process payroll a couple of different ways. One option is for a city to have a checking account dedicated to payroll, and all payroll checks are paid out of this account. This checking account sits in a predominant fund, and normally it sits in the general fund. Another option is for the city to process payroll out of 2 or more checking accounts, for example, one in the general fund and one in the water and sewer fund, where they pay their general fund employees out of general and they pay their water and sewer employees out of water and sewer. Some cities find that the separate checking accounts help them to keep the cash accurate between the funds. However, using this approach will cause you to not be able to file your returns electronically in payroll in QuickBooks because the city has one federal ID number and then it would have two parts, one in general and one in water and sewer. So to work around this, you would have to manually print your quarterly returns in both companies, general and water and sewer, and then manually combine them and do a paper submission of your quarterly forms. But cities that use the one payroll account will need to set up water and sewer through what's called a due-to-from process because water and sewer would owe the general fund for that portion of the payroll. It is a little more complicated in the general ledger setup. However, by doing it this way, you can fully utilize the total functionality of QuickBooks payroll subscriptions. So you would just have to weigh which way you are going to set this up. To start the setup process, we would go to the top, and from the menu at the top, we would click Employees and then Payroll Setup, and we would begin the process. You can always leave this and come back to this area, but it's normally best if you try to block out some time to make substantial progress on setup because in payroll, setup is the most time-consuming and it is the most critical. Processing the payroll each time period takes very little time if the setup has been done correctly, completely, and accurately. This is truly an investment of time for sure. You can navigate throughout the sections on the left in the setup through things like company setup, employee setup, taxes, year-to-date payrolls, or finishing up. I just recommend you go in order. And just a reminder, the IRS has a compliance toolkit on their website. It's Form 14581, Federal, State, Local Government Compliance Self-Assessment, and it's a really good tool to see if you are fully compliant with the way that the federal agencies want you to do things in payroll. Screens will just pop up automatically and there will be next throughout. Here it's asking how are you going to compensate your employees. I would check all three boxes: salary, hourly wage and overtime, bonus award, and one-time compensation. If you feel like you may not use the bonus award or one-time compensation, the reason I would go ahead and check it is so that you don't have to come back and set it up later in the event that you haven't thought about something. But generally, these are the three that are actually used by local governments in Georgia. Here, it's asking about your compensation list. Hourly, overtime at 1.5, salary and bonus, but then you see one that says pay overtime at double time. Unless your particular city does pay your overtime at twice the hourly rate, I would go ahead and delete this so that you don't accidentally pay somebody overtime at time and a half. But don't assume these things. Always check your personnel policy and make sure you're not using these things before you delete them. But all you would do in this case is you would highlight the double time hourly, and then of course you would click the delete button in the right hand corner. Next in the setup process is what insurances the city provides. If the city does not provide any insurance, then click the box, My company does not provide insurance benefit. Cities are very unique in the benefits that they offer and how the cost of those benefits are split between the city and the employee. So you want to make sure in your setup that you know how the city does each of their insurances. As you're continuing to click Next each time, when you get to this, you'll want to make sure this is done correctly. This part of setup is very important, and you do not want to assume things about this. Pre-tax deductions. Allow these deductions to be taken off of gross wages for federal, state, FICA, and Medicare. This saves the city employee payment and taxes. But you want to make absolutely sure that you have a Section 125 plan that has been approved by the IRS code before checking that box. Next, it's asking you, when it comes time to pay your health insurance, who do you pay? So, you see right there in green, set up the payment schedule for health insurance. A payment schedule is, do you want QuickBooks to remind you to make this payment? And in this case, I selected I don't need a regular payment schedule for this item. But if you know that on the first day of every month you pay this, or on the 31st of the previous month, or you can set up your payment frequency, and QuickBooks will actually pop up a reminder in your liability box that we will see later. Here's life insurance, and again, the payee is the vendor name, who you are actually paying for life insurance. So what QuickBooks does is it asks you these questions about what you provide, and then it asks you for payment schedules for who to pay. Account numbers are, of course, your account numbers that can be found on the invoices from these particular vendors to set up your payment schedules. On retirement, if you have what is commonly referred to as deferred compensation, you will select the 457B plan. You'll want to consult your 457 agreement to determine if you have Roth contributions and need to check that box. Just remember, as you are doing your setup, to ask questions of each one of these boxes to determine if you need to set up anything. And just a reminder that QuickBooks has notations in blue. On this particular screen, it says, what are these retirement benefits? And when you click on those, it will give you more in-depth information and issue clarification. We're continuing on with setting up the payment schedule. So this is who do you pay your 457B to, with an account number and a payee. In this particular case, I did select a payment frequency because this is an amount that is coming out of an employee's check, and we want to remit that pretty quickly, so because I feel like the employee is losing interest in dividends earning. So that is why I selected that. Here you will see, now we're going to talk about leave time. What kinds of paid time off do you provide to your employees? And if your city provides sick time, you will check that box. If your city provides vacation time, you will check that box. But if no paid leave time is provided, of course you would check the My Employees Do Not Get Paid Time Off. If you have any garnishments on any employee, you will select wage garnishment as a checkbox. And if you have any taxable fringes, such as take-home cars under the commute rule, you would want to select taxable fringe benefits. For more information on the taxable fringes, refer to the IRS publication on fringes that are applicable to local governments. The setup process is a great time to verify that items such as fringe benefits have been handled correctly in the past. And again, I guess you can tell I am stressing the importance of setup and verification. Now it's asking us on this garnishment, who is it going to go to, the payment. So this is where a court would be established and a potential account number, case number. I did set up this frequency as monthly, but I would read my court order very carefully to determine if monthly is the remittance schedule that you need to be on, or if it needs to be more frequently or less frequently as you set those up. Now you start to see that we are into entering sensitive information about employees, so this would be a good time for you to make sure if you are using QuickBooks or about to use QuickBooks for your payroll functions that you have adequately safeguarded your data on your computer to protect this sensitive data. And we're just continuing to enter information, and of course this information can be found on the W-4, can be found on the G-4 inside the personnel jacket, those types of things. Here is where on this particular employee it is asking us how frequently we are going to pay this employee, and we are going to pay our employees biweekly. Biweekly is the common method of payment. However, there are governments that pay weekly and pay monthly, but biweekly does seem to be the most frequent. On this particular employee, they were salaried and they were not entitled to overtime and bonus pay. So in that particular case, we would click salary and enter their salary amount. Here are all the deductions and city paid cost, and you will only check the boxes that are applicable to this employee. If you feel like that the amount here that you will enter will be specific for this employee. It will be specific related to the amount of the garnishment, and you will notice like on the garnishment here, I said to take out $25, but when it hits $3,500 as a deduction to quit taking it out. Those are what the limits are. In the 457, the IRS currently has a limit of $17,500. That can be taken out, so when it gets to that limit to make it stop, you can put some percentages in here or you can put your dollar amounts. Now we're on to the leave. This one is sick time. You'll select what your policy states. Do not assume on leave. Read the policy very carefully. In this example, this employee is going to begin accruing leave immediately and never lose it. The drop-down box will give you a choice on, and here you are actually putting that this particular employee earns 4 per paycheck. If it's 8 hours per month, you would check the 8 hours per month, so it's the frequency that you actually have. And if you are bringing on a existing employee, you would want to bring on their leave balances at the bottom, the hours available as of, so that they would have their beginning balances before you started processing inside QuickBooks. Vacation, on this particular one, I did set a limit that the employee can only accrue up to 360 hours, and then it would actually no longer let the employee accrue leave time. This is helpful because sometimes governments will change their leave policies, and if the employee is hired before a certain date or time, QuickBooks does allow you to track different leave schedules depending on if the city has multiple leave schedules. Direct deposit information. If you are currently offering direct deposit or you wish to offer direct deposit, remember you should have a form completed by your employee that has the routing number and the account number and what type of checking account and the name of the bank that you actually want this direct deposit to go to. Activation of direct deposit is a separate process inside QuickBooks, so you will want to do that after your payroll is set up if you plan to use the direct deposit option and you have the payroll subscription to do so. Here are our taxes segment. You'll want to make sure that Georgia is selected in both the subject to withholding and the subject to unemployment tax unless you have employees that are working in another state. If you do have employees that live or work in another state, you would click the yes box there. The federal information can be found on the W-4. The filing status, single, married, the number of allowances, and if there's extra withholding dollar amounts, and if there are any special issues or special conditions with this particular employee, you can select those. Now, one of the things I do want to bring to your attention, QuickBooks automatically defaults and brings up the 3 boxes where it says subject to Medicare, subject to Social Security, and subject to federal unemployment. Well, you will always want to unclick the subject to federal unemployment because local governments are not subjected to federal unemployment. So you'll want to make sure that is turned off. By clicking Next, it just takes us now from the federal taxes to the state taxes. This information can be found on the G4 of your employee. You will want to make sure that you put the information that is on their G4, and it says, is this employee subject to any special local taxes not shown here? And in Georgia, we do not have any local taxes, so no would be the answer there. I am going to back up, though, and also reiterate that the subject to Georgia unemployment and the subject to Georgia admin assessment, always make sure that is checked, even though you may only report to the Department of Labor, not necessarily pay the Department of Labor, or they will not show up on your reports. Once you complete the tax section, you'll see what has been added. Later, we will change the FUTA rate to 0 since cities do not pay FUTA. Cities have 2 options with respect to the Georgia Department of Labor. They can either be reimbursable or contributory. If you are a reimbursable city, that means that you pay when an unemployment claim arises, and you will enter 0 in both of these fields. If you are a contributory city, which means you have a rate that has been established by the Department of Labor and you pay the Department of Labor quarterly, then you will enter the rate from your most recent correspondence from the Department of Labor. QuickBooks automatically knows that this rate only applies to the first $9,500 in wages of each employee that is taxable based on the current law. Refer to your most recent correspondence from the Georgia Department of Labor to make sure you're setting up the correct rates. When it comes time to pay the IRS, you can pay the IRS with check, or you can pay the IRS with ePay if you establish your EFTPS account, electronic funds. ePay is a mechanism where you pay the IRS your 941 taxes. As I mentioned, you've got to in order to utilize this feature, you must have that EFTPS account set up with the IRS so that you can enter this information as you proceed. If you do not have this information, then you will set up your federal 941 as a check. Your IRS letter will tell you what your pay frequency is. If you are unsure about your pay frequency, then my suggestion would be to remit after every payroll until you get your answer so that you won't have any issues with penalties and interest from late payment. Excuse me. This is our Georgia withholding, and it is due to the Department of Revenue. Again, you've got to set up your ePay information through the GTC, the Georgia Taxpayer Center portal, before beginning to make e-payments. Until this is completed, you would check the check as your payment option or payment method. DOR requires certain taxpayers to pay through GTC, and other taxpayers have an option of sending a check. DOR will send you a letter telling you your pay frequency and your login to the GTC, and you can see your payment frequency actually in the GTC portal. It's important to know your payment frequencies so that you will not be subjected to any penalties and interest for late payments. And if you enter an account number that is non-standard to the format, QuickBooks will give you a notation out by the side and will highlight it in yellow for you to check that number again. This is the Georgia Department of Labor, DOL. DOL is paid or reported to on a quarterly basis. And again, your DOL number can be found in the pre-printed DOL-4 form or in your letter and correspondence from the Department of Labor. Now that the initial payroll setup is complete, you can go to Payroll Center to edit or add some additional items needed before processing your first payroll. QuickBooks defaults all payroll items in setup to a general payroll expenditure. That means it will send all of your salaries to one general ledger account number. Because in local governments we charge our payroll to functions and departments, then we have to use one of those workarounds that I discussed earlier in QuickBooks to set this up through the payroll items. Therefore, hourly payroll will have hourly payroll items set up for each department. Salary payroll will have a payroll item. This is a little time consuming on the front end, and because we choose not to use classes in QuickBooks for our workaround so that our financial reporting is simplified, we have to make this modification in the payroll side. From the lower left-hand corner, you will see Payroll Item. You will click Payroll Item, and you'll select New to start adding these payroll items by department and function. This time, we're not going to use the defaults. We will want to use the custom setting because we're going to go away from the defaults that have been established by QuickBooks. We are going to set up the wage information by departments, so we will select wage, and then we will select the salary ones first and then go through the others. We'll do regular pay, and here you'll notice that the overtime pay is grayed out because they're not eligible. So we're going to set up salary for streets. So before it was just called salary. Now we are making this item salary streets to differentiate it by department. And then we will use our drop-down menu and we will go to the account number because 4200 is the function or department number for streets based on the Uniform Chart of Accounts. And we will select the regular employees, which is the 511100. We will continue setting these up until we have all departments in all pay types established for vacation, sick, hourly, and salary. In addition to customizing the salary, hourly, vacation, and sick, we will also need to customize the expenditure codes for health insurance. So again, from the payroll list, we will click New, and we will add health insurance streets and change the expenditure code to the group health insurance for the street department. Now we need to go in and enter the remainder of our employees. We do that by selecting employees. We will select the first employee that we entered through our setup process, and you'll see that it defaulted to salary because that's the defaults of QuickBooks. Now we know that this particular employee is in the police department, so we will now select salary police. The payroll schedule has not been set up. We did set up the pay frequency, but the payroll schedule was not. We would set this payroll schedule up when the pay period begins and ends and when the paychecks are paid. We will set that up now. This is what helps you know the cycle that you will be on for your payroll processing. So you will pull out your payroll calendar that you have established for the year so that you will have a good begin payroll date, an end payroll date, and a check date so that you can set up your first payroll that you would be processing by using QuickBooks. Most governments do just only have one pay schedule, but, for example, if you pay some people biweekly and you pay some people, such as your boards and your council members, monthly, you might have two payment schedules. You might have a monthly payment schedule and you might have a biweekly payment schedule for your processing. I apologize. Here we are adding another employee. This one is an hourly street employee that only has health insurance, no other items. So we just use all of the drop-down menus. Then we will click on Taxes in the upper right-hand corner to add information. So the same information we entered on that first employee, we entered through the setup process. This is a different way of going in and finishing the setup, so it looks a little bit differently. These are the tabs for the taxes, and this employee is Blake A. Kennesaw, and he has a federal tab, a state tab, and an other tab. Again, the federal tab is where you'll want to unclick that federal unemployment tax box, and you'll want to enter the information from the W-4 form. And you'll continue with the state tab from information from your G-4, and the other tab is related to the Department of Labor unemployment. This is the same information process that you went through on the first employee. Again, it just looks differently because you're going in from another way inside QuickBooks to finish. You'll continue adding all your employees until this is complete. In our next session, we're going to be moving from setup into the actual processing of the payroll and all of the reporting that comes along with it. So at this time, we'll start to field some questions. If anyone has some questions, if you'll just type those in.
It doesn't look like we're going to have any questions for the session today.
Okay.
That means you did a great job, Sabrina. We will be sending out something next week about the next session in payroll that we'll cover. Be on the lookout for that. You will be able to download the PowerPoint presentation from today's session as well. And you can also be able to review it, the recorded version, from our website. So be looking for that as well. Email me any comments you may have, or if you have any specific questions that need to go to Sabrina about your jurisdiction, she'll be glad to help you with those. And we welcome any comments you may have about future webinars or training that you may need. And if no one has any further comments, then this will conclude our session for today. Thanks so much for joining us.